Mayibuye, Mayibuye Afrika, eyathathwa kubaba bethu sisese bumnyameni. Mayibuye, Mayibuye, Mayibuye Afrika, eyathathwa kubaba bethu sisese bumnyameni.
I cannot be precise about the date of my birth, but I calculate that I was born in year 1898 on Rhodesian soil. My father, John Luthuli, had gone there from Natal at the time of the Mayibuye rebellion, and when hostilities ended, he stayed on at Solusi Mission near Bulawayo as evangelist and interpreter. My father died not long after my birth. His mortal remains lie buried at the mission. My mother, Mtonya, upon whom fell the main burden of my upbringing, spent part of her childhood in the royal kraal of King Cetshwayo, a descendant of Dingane in Zululand. Around 1908, we returned to what was soon to become the Union of South Africa. We went to Vryheid in Natal, where I was set to tending the mission mules. It was my mother who rescued me from this intimacy with mules when she decided I needed an education and sent me to Groudville to get it. Here I joined the household of my uncle, Martin Luthuli, then chief of Groudville. He had also been one of the founding members of the ANC in 1912.
My eldest uncle, that's Martin Luthuli, became chief. And then when he adopted my brother into his family. So he lent the house. He was also not a hereditary chief. That is Martin Luthuli. He was just chosen for his merit and for his personality and whatever.
Groudville is my home and the home of my forefathers, since its founding by the Reverend Aldin Grout in 1840. Being a child, I did not then realize how hard my mother labored to ensure my education. As well as working her fields, she was forced to walk regularly several miles to Stenger, the nearest white settlement, to earn a few shillings washing clothes, a far cry from the royal household of King Cetshwayo. In 1914, having reached Standard 4 in the Groudville School, I continued my education as a boarder at Ohlanga Institute. I remember there it was risky to close one's eyes during grace before meals. Wartime shortages could lead to the food disappearing from one's plate. The headmaster was Dr. John Dube. He was also the first president of the ANC. After Ohlanga, I spent 4 years at Edendale near Pietermaritzburg, where I trained as a teacher and acquired a high regard for that profession. I was then appointed principal to Blaubosch Intermediate School in the Natal Uplands. Not as impressive as it sounds, I was also the entire staff. Here my religion received the jog it needed as I came under the influence of a very conscientious minister, the Reverend Mtembu, and I subsequently became a lay preacher. After a couple of years in Blaubosch, I was given a bursary to put me through a 2-year higher teacher's training course at Adams College, a mission school on the Natal coast, little imagining that I would join the staff there and remain for 15 years. The careers open to Africans there were extremely few except for manual labor. So I was fascinated by the horizons which my own education opened up and eager to be instrumental in helping to educate others.
Then I was in Albert Luthuli's, and he was my teacher in 2 subjects, in music and principles of education. He had his way of teaching music. He had his ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and would hear him walking in the corridor, and we say, he's coming. And when he got into class, he would say, Alan Merafe, up, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. He's already got it on the board. And you must sing it like he has taught you to understand it. And of course, it wasn't easy, but I always saw him as one of my great teachers. Indeed, he was.
Oh, they liked him very much because I think he knew what he was about. Yes, teaching methods of teaching and organization and music. No, they loved him. They loved him. He wasn't that strict.
Although even at Adams College, a mild form of apartheid was in practice, life here insulated us in some measure from what was happening in South Africa. But I remember my horror when a white Afrikaner colleague pointed out that Afrikaner children are brought up to dislike and look down on natives. Until then, I suppose I had viewed brutalities as individual aberrations rather than the rotten fruit of childhood training. At Adams, I became a compulsive football fan, which led to the opportunity of meeting all sorts of people, from the loftiest to the most disreputable.
And if they had won and were cheered and perhaps given a trophy, then the whole school would burst in shooting stars and sing the song.
That's right, the Shooting Stars. That was a great team. You see, I think he was a man of 2 lives.
It was at Adams College that I met my wife, Nokanya Bengu, the granddaughter of a Zulu chief. She was one of my students and then became a teacher at Adams. After the usual lengthy negotiations between our 2 families in true Zulu style, we married in 1927 and my wife settled in Gradville. I count myself fortunate among men to have married so good a wife and devout Christian woman. Ungrudgingly, she has taken on the whole burden of the home and of working our small holding. Between 1929 and 1945, Nokanya bore me 7 children, and we prayed really hard about them because of the South Africa they must live in. As I became immersed in public life, I quite literally neglected my family.
I'm not really aware of being deprived of him as a father, in the sense that maybe the time we spent with him was prime time, I would say.
Oh, I remember my father is a very loving, and gentle man. Very broad-minded, and not authoritarian. And yet, you wanted, to listen to him, take his advice, and try to do what he expected of you.
Yeah, he was very open. We have a tradition in the family of a lot of openness about our life experiences, if I may say, from very early.
He scrutinized progress at school very, very thoroughly indeed. And we often used to say to both of them, both father and mother, You know, we often used to say that you didn't stop being teachers at Adams College. You know, you're still teachers even here at home. So my father, if you wrote him a letter and there were mistakes in the letter, spelling or whatever the mistake would be, he would correct the letter, painstakingly send it back to you.
In 1936, I left Adams College when I was elected chief of the Mvumbi Mission Reserve. The truth was, I did not want to become chief.
He was a chief of his area, and it was the type of chieftaincy which was democratic. It was not hereditary. He was elected by the tribe, and that also indicated the respect which the community had of him.
Now, I saw almost as though for the first time the naked poverty of my people, the daily hurt to human beings.
I think the challenges of his chieftainship were opening new avenues of how to deal with the black person's problem. You couldn't just solve them at local leadership level. You had to do something more than that.
Grauwil has never had a courthouse built by the department. And Luthuli himself came to sit under a big tree where he presided over a court surrounded by lowly tribesmen, his headmen, indunas. They were lowly people, and by that I don't mean to say they didn't know anything. They were lowly because they were humble. I'm talking about humble people who took interest in the affairs of the community, you see. They were by no means unintellectual. They were very, very clever. He was a great counselor. He would guide the person to solve his own problem.
He would spend a lot of his energy going all over Natal to make cane growers form committees so that they could talk about their problems in cane growing. Even during the time of his chieftainship, it was one of his prime occupations to attend to making a unified effort by the cane growers of Natal.
Our efforts bore some fruit in procuring advances for production and transport costs, reorganizing quotas and keeping Melville Sugar Mill open.
And in the year 1938, we were excited when we heard that Luthuli was invited to go to India to address a missionary conference in Madras.
A sad comment, even when South Africa was far behind the wake of our ship. White South African attitudes persisted. We, for some reason, were traveling second class, while the white delegates traveled first. The leader of our delegation, a Dutch reform minister, said to us on the first Sunday, "Well, gentlemen, the white passengers might object if you were to come to the first class to worship here. Would you make your own arrangements here?" The following Sunday, we did join the first class lounge for multiracial worship. The ship did not sink. The spectacle in India of the church seriously tackling the desperate poverty made me aware of our sluggish pace in South Africa. I came home an incisive critic of South African Christianity, but that does not diminish my loyalty.
Some people talk about Christianity. He felt it. It was so much part of him. Not merely an impressionist wanting to create some impression to people.
The Christian commitment took precedence in his life. I think maybe because he was a Christian before he became a politician. Next to his getting up in the morning and preparing himself for the day, he would not be prepared for the day without his morning meditations. And not just as a matter of routine, but as a matter of finding direction for the day and for the future.
the advent of World War II, General Smuts diligently sought our help in the war effort, but Africans generally were unenthusiastic.
Young South Africa, come forward and move on to the battlefronts. Unite for victory.
Army life for Africans meant peeling potatoes or at best driving trucks, never bearing weapons.
Then came the war, and overnight Mr. Condi converted his industry into one for making assegais, weapons with which the native forces of the Union are armed. The men who man the assegais, armed with the traditional weapons of their forefathers, these native troops go marching on, symbolizing the spirit of willingness to serve.
My father often talked about General Smuts. You know, he was referred to as the general. And he used to be very angry with the fact that he had deceived, you know, the people. My mother here and Mrs. Kuma here, the late Mrs. Kuma next door here, Mrs. Mzoneli, and some other women, Mrs. Mvuyana, you know, they had an organization called the Daughters of Africa. And they used to do a lot of progressive and good work for the Grounding Mission Station. So when this came out, that in fact the soldiers were needing clothing, warm clothing, and all that, they felt that they should do something. They used to come here, to my home here, and they start knitting. We all used to sit and knit and knit and knit.
The Herzog Bills, product of the unholy alliance between Herzog and Smuts in 1936, had removed the last lingering vestiges of political opportunity for Africans. The Natives Land and Trust Act confined us more effectively to 13% of South Africa. The Natives Representation Act finally made it impossible for any African to qualify as a voter. Our interests were to be represented by the Native Representative Council, or NRC. In 1946, I was elected into the NRC.
And our demand had remained and remains until now that we should have one non-racial voters' roll. So when the native representative in this parliament or in the NRC, we were very unhappy. We didn't come out with any statements on it. But Luthuli to have gone there was good and not good. It was through his presence there and discussions that took place that eventually the Native Representative Council declared that it was a toy telephone and could not effectively communicate between the Africans and the government of this country.
We were not blind to the qualities, the virtues, the abilities of individual members of the NRC. And a man like Luthuli, also we admired him as an individual, but as a group of men who were serving in government institutions, we attacked them very fiercely at times.
I don't know if you remember the big strike, miners' strike in 1946. This was the first big strike of the gold mine workers. And they were marching on Johannesburg from the mines when they were met by the police, huge numbers. And the police smashed it up, drove the mine workers back into the mines. When the police broke up the strike, there was tremendous indignation amongst the Africans because this was a peaceful strike. And there was tremendous indignation. And remember, this was after the war. The war had been fought if you will remember, for the Atlantic Charter. And after the war, everything was supposed to be okay. And the first thing that was okay was that the African miners workers were shot down. So it had a tremendous effect on all Africans, including Luthuli. Instead of turning to the Native Representative Council at that time to find out their views on the strike, because this was a national matter, the government ignored them. And the NRC went on to a strike of its own. It didn't disband, but it stopped sitting. But now Luthuli was becoming highly involved.
It had been the Act of Union in 1910, handing over the whole of South Africa to a minority of whites, lock, stock and barrel, which first hardened African opposition. Our reply, a very mild one to begin, was the formation of the African National Congress. In the course of Congress history, no civilized method of attempting to get recognition and redress had been neglected, but perhaps reason, argument, appealing to humane values and democratic principles are things most white South Africans cannot understand. They have consistently turned a deaf ear. Under Dr. Kluma's leadership in the 1940s, Men with a Purpose gradually gave the ANC a new character. In 1945, I was precipitated formally into Congress, almost by accident. At the Natal AGM, to replace the ailing Dr. Dube, confusion reigned. I leapt onto the platform and called for silence. I was promptly elected onto the executive.
This is now in 1946. The Indian people had launched their passive resistance campaign against the Asiatic Land Tenure Act.
And Indians were not allowed to buy land without special permission. And as a result of that, Natal started a defiance campaign. They occupied a plot of ground symbolically. And then they were being arrested every day. And this was world news. And gave tremendous publicity as a result of that. So South Africa had now come on the scene. Nobody knew about South Africa and its laws until that time.
The South African ambassador to the United States and the leader of the Union's delegation to the United Nations, Mr. G.P. Ewerster, takes the Speaker's rostrum.
Mr. President, in the course of the opening debate last year, we had the occasion to observe that we in Africa were the targets of much ill-informed criticism. We pointed out that the solution of African problems was an uphill task.
The United Nations condemnation of South Africa also was voiced in June 1946, as India withdrew its High Commission. Then, in May 1948, Dr. Malan led the National Party to victory in the apartheid election. White South Africa was ready to go further along the road of discrimination started by Herzog and Smuts.
But I remember after one election, when they said, I don't know. White South Africans seem to see just like this. They don't see the light of what is to come.
Soon after, a visit to the USA reprieved me from the tense complexity of my homeland for 9 months. I returned to South Africa in 1949, some time after the appalling Durban riots. The founding of Congress Youth League in 1944 had given young men like Lembete, Yengwa, Mandela, Sisulu, Tongo, Tambo, and others a sphere for action. In 1949, the younger men replaced the cautious Kluma with Dr. James Moroka and immediately adopted the program of action. Demonstrations countrywide, strike action and non-violent disobedience to immoral laws were to replace words. AWG champion, Natal ANC president, was opposed by the Youth League men. They asked me to stand against him, and in 1951, by a modest majority, I was elected as his replacement.
There was tremendous dissatisfaction with the champion, but he ruled like a warlord. If he had a meeting and you disagreed with him at the meeting, he had his henchmen. take you, throw you out, you see. And now there are very few people in the town that were prepared to stand up to Champion. But suddenly Luthuli was pushed forward by the Youth League. Now we were surprised. We thought, oh, the chief. How will the chief stand up? He's after all a government man. And they said to us, you needn't worry about this chief is different. and Luthuli was obviously the man because of his deep feeling for people and his preparedness to stand up to anything. He was completely unafraid.
I attended the election, and this election of the was such that I think Mr. Champion happened to pack the hall with his people, his followers, his friends, with his supporters, and in fact to ensure that he was elected, that Mr. Champion was elected, he did that. So, in fact, instead of delegates voting at that meeting for the president, Mr. Champion, in his very colorful and dramatic way, said, those who want Champion this side, those who want Luthuli that side. This boomerang, in other words, of Mr. Champion, because he was sure that in this way he would beat Chief Luthuli, but in fact, Chief Luthuli was elected.
Luthuli is one of the best chairmen I've ever seen. He controlled the meeting completely.
I met the chief now in 1951. In 1951, he attended my meetings. At the time, I was on a campaign, you see, against the, to bring about a non-racial policy.
The Defiance campaign.
Before the Defiance campaign. After the 1949 riots. That's when I met him. He impressed me a great deal. His speech at that meeting, and I was fascinated by his personality and struck to see by honesty and a free thinker. That's what I thought of him.
The coming Defiance campaign was supported by large crowds at mass meetings throughout the country.
1952, New Brighton, Port Elizabeth, was the venue chosen for the launch of the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign, launched jointly by the African National Congress under the leadership of Dr. Morocco and the South African Indian Congress under Yusuf Dadu and Monty Naika.
The chief fully supported the Defiance campaign. You must remember that the chief believed in non-violence as a principle.
Europeans only, the national motto of White South Africa, was to be the main target of our campaign. From the 26th of June, we sent in carefully trained volunteers to publicly disobey unjust and oppressive laws. My job was to organize and to keep up the pressure in Natal. By October 1952, over 8,000 volunteers had been imprisoned without violence or disorder. But the success of the growing Defiance campaign led to police infiltration of agents provocateurs, and to our horror, riots broke out in Port Elizabeth and elsewhere. The police counter-rioted to deadly effect. New legislation imposed bitter penalties, including whipping for defying any law by way of protest. Meanwhile, trouble was at hand. Dr. A. Selena, Secretary to Native Affairs, summoned me to Pretoria.
After I saw Dr. Iceland, when we went to Pretoria, that's when he was expelled.
I had a great deal of respect for Chief Luthuli, both as an individual and, of course, for the political statement he made by refusing to resign from the ANC and preferring to be deposed from his position as chief.
And I called him Luthuli and I then warned him. I said, you know, you are neglecting your duties as chief, and this opposition is building up. You, as a chief, you are part of the government of the country, the running of your reserve, and you are serving two masters, and two masters in opposition to each other, and you think you are doing the right thing. And he said, sir, if I must make a choice, I choose politics.
He couldn't make any choice, because as far as he was concerned, he was still serving his people. And that's how, in fact, he didn't make any choice. He let the government do what it does, but as far as he's concerned, as far as the people were concerned, we respected him.
Chief's answer was, well, you know, if you are going to try to get honey from a hive, you must expect to be stung.
The government has deposed me as chief after 30 years spent knocking in vain, patiently, moderately at a closed and barred door. I have decided to remain in the struggle for democratic rights in South Africa. The future might hold for me ridicule, imprisonment, concentration camp, flogging, banishment, and even death. I only pray to the Almighty. The road to freedom is via the cross. Mayibuye, iAfrika. In 1952, I took over as chairman of the ANC from Dr. Moroka.
Moroka was leading this defiance campaign. The government used the Suppression of Communism Act to break the defiance campaign. If you went into a defiance campaign, that was communism in terms of the Suppression of Communism Act. So when the defiance campaign started, the government decided to break it by arresting the leaders in terms of the Suppression of Communism Act. Now, when they came before the court, the ANC leaders had one set of attorneys and one set of advocates, but Morocco immediately separated himself from it. So then the ANC decided that Morocco was no good, didn't have the guts. Now they were looking for somebody else. And the Natal ANC chap said to him, the man you must take is Luthuli. He's afraid of nothing. And that's how Luthuli was chosen as the head of the ANC.
By the time the elections were conducted, Chief Luthuli had made a great impact because his activities in the African National Congress had drawn the wrath of the government.
Luthuli was, of course, a man that was acceptable by everybody. His sincerity, his leadership was never questioned. You would have people like Professor Matthews still, doubted by others, particularly the youth. Never with Luthuli.
Now came a turning point in the struggle. As the defiance campaign had a number of after effects, the state reacted forcefully with bannings and intimidation, but it left a new climate of militant defiance, especially amongst women.
When there was an upsurge of the women, when they were attacking the beer halls, and afterwards they attacked the dipping tanks, he did not in any way approve of what they were doing, but at the same time, he did not condemn what they were doing, I'll put it that way.
In Cato Manor and Chesterville, outside Durban, all is quiet after rioting in which 4 were killed and many injured. Resentful at the opening of beer halls in competition with home brewing, the women sparked off mob violence, which left an aftermath of burnt shops, houses, schools, clinics, offices and even churches. It's hard to conceive that such wanton destruction was not carefully planned and directed by vicious agitators. With the devastation still smouldering, police who had quelled the riots were still engaged in rounding up the troublemakers.
Preceding that, there was the boycott of potatoes and cigarettes and other produce coming from allegedly nationalist organizations like the Rembrandt Group. They didn't boycott all the cigarettes, they boycotted cigarettes from certain groups which were believed to be supporting the National Party financially and that sort of thing.
In mid-1953, my first ban was served on me. It was, by comparison with my later bans, a mild affair of 1 year.
Well, not that he was a person who complained about anything that was done to him, but at the same time, he did the best with what was left of his time and space.
Another difficulty running a resistance movement is money.
It was very expensive. We used our own funds to go to ANC, our own transport. Now I say, why did I do that? But it's because one believes in the cause we're under. That is right, probably it shall benefit us someday.
His jobs never paid. From the time he left teaching as a chief, they used to earn 13 pounds a quarter, you know. That is 52 pounds a year, you know, with a family of 7 children and all these dependents. He tended to worry more about the, you know, the problems of the other person than his own problems, you know. So that if he had the little money, he would rather let that person, you know, have it. Somehow he just didn't care for, you know, money. I don't know why.
He had a little shop, you know, and I knew that he was facing problems. I don't think he was cut out to be a trader. And that little shop caused him a lot of trouble.
At any rate, all said and done, he was a bad business person.
In 1954, Dr. Verwoerd's Bantu Education Act was passed through Parliament.
Yeah, you know, when Verwoerd came about with Bantu education, first introduced that bill in Parliament. I've never seen, that was the time I saw Luthuli angry when he was commenting on that.
The Bantu education policy certainly bothered Luthuli because he saw that this was a real attempt on the part of the white administration to ensure that black education was going to be something inferior. It wasn't going to be the same as whites.
The declared aim of Dr. Verwoerd was to produce Africans aspiring no higher than certain forms of labor. What an appalling world for our young ones, although my own children are old enough to miss the worst. A total school boycott was called by Congress. It couldn't work, and after savage reprisals, African parents submitted unhappily to this further violation.
It made it impossible. It made great problems for the movement. You had that bannings. You had the searching, which was almost weekly or sometimes daily in a particular week. So you can't draft things. You can't have things properly done. Anytime you're expecting the police to come and raid. It was the most difficult period.
A meeting to protest the forced removals from Sofia town took me to Johannesburg in July 1954.
He was the key person and to speak that day. And as he came with the train, they gave him a banning order. So I had to take over that meeting. He himself was sitting just opposite the square. I think he was in the house of Mabuza, and Mabuza, sitting there, listening to everything. that was taking place. I addressed that meeting, which I think 11,000 people attended that meeting, that rally.
I cannot be with you in the flesh, but I am with you in the spirit. When forces of reaction seek to uproot you from your sacred shrines and castles, your homes, as leaders we shall do all in our power to consolidate the country, to oppose this outrageously tyrannical scheme, to mobilize our people in the Resist Apartheid campaign, to speak with one voice which will shake to repentance the hearts of white South Africa. Mayibuye! The remainder of 1954 was taken up with planning the Congress of the People. I can speak only vaguely of this period because I suffered a stroke early that year.
We had shifted the struggle from a political elite to the people. It was very vital. But the seeds of real conflict and demanding restoration of human dignity was being taken at the time of the Freedom Charter to almost every street and every factory and so on.
The Congress of the People was an idea which came with Professor Matthews, who had toured the United States. The Congress movement, which was the ANC Indian Congress, Allied People's Organization, and which was the whole Congressman Saktu, I think, then adopted a resolution that we shall call a conference of all people of all nationalities in South Africa who will go to Cape Town. There we shall adopt a freedom charter. That's when that took place in 1955, June.
There were many people who were conversion to Cape Town. I mean, the atmosphere was really great, And as more and more people gathered, it was almost electric. And there was a feeling of expectancy.
Mandela, Sisulu, all the band. I was still out of the band, So that's why I became the opening chairman of the Congress of the People. That is why I was the person who decorated Dr. Dadu. The mother of Dr. Dadu was there, he couldn't attend the meeting, and Father Hardy still, and Chief Luthuli in absentia. They got what is called Isitwala and It's a feather from a bird in the Cape, which was given to the heroes. And it's Isitwala. If you carry that in your head, in other words, you put it on in celebrations, then you are known you are a hero or you are a very brave man. Isitwala and
The purpose of that conference was adoption of the Freedom Charter. And as I say, the Freedom Charter had come right from the grassroots. It was a document of the people, through and through. And so by the time it got to that conference, it was virtually, an acceptable document.
The masses were hot. They wanted something done, and this Congress did it. A lot of singing, a lot of demonstrations, and it was really a very big national gathering. The police arrived at the Congress, what it was called. They surrounded the whole Congress. They were mounted police and very armed police. And the Congress went on despite the police. They took documents, they took names.
It was towards the end, of the events. And singing, singing the struggle songs of the time, like Mayibuye, iAfrika, and you know, Amandla, the saluting and everything, and the people were simply, you know, it was like, now we are really moving towards freedom. We are there almost. And then, of course, the ever-present special branch in plain uniform, which was always present in all ANC rallies. You know. But you knew how they behave and how they look, you know, how they look at people. You know, they had that sly eye, and their eyes had actually sort of become permanently like that, you know. You tell, you know. So eventually, you know, things went apart. They were beginning to fall apart. And before we knew what, the police were surrounding. The whole big area was surrounded by the police. And as that was happening, those on horseback were also organizing themselves into some formation, you know, and surrounding the area. You know, a dangerous because there were thousands of people there, you know, and all of a sudden this happened. I think they, you know, they wanted some stampede of some sort, and we escaped. You know, everybody managed to get out of that situation under guidance from the microphone of Dr. Tongo.
The Congress of the People angered the oppressor. The police burst into activity with union-wide raids and harassments. By now, Strydom was Prime Minister. On the 5th December 1956, soon after my second ban expired, I was arrested in Groudville on a charge of high treason. I was in bed when the police knock came. They came through to the bedroom and ordered me up. Yes, one of them greeted me. The day has come.
We woke up, you know, the usual time. And, you know, when you wake up with a small kid, the first thing you do in the morning is to go to the toilet. And I opened the door, the bedroom door. And as I opened it, then there was this policeman standing there in front of the door with a shotgun. Because as soon as I opened the door, I think he lifted his shotgun and sort of pointed at me. I don't know. We came to the lounge, and from the lounge went to the dining room. The whole house was full of smoke, cigarette smoke, and all these policemen were all over the place here. And of course, eventually then I had to use a bad pen, you know, to relieve myself, because they wouldn't allow me to go out. And then, and of course, they let us go to school. And the principal at the time, Mr. Naba, said a small prayer for my father and for me. And that was that. And when I came back from school, of course, my father was gone.
Initially, 156 of us were arrested, and we ended up at the Johannesburg fort until bail was arranged.
All of us were banned, and our banning orders said we couldn't talk to each other. But here we were all together in the same cell. So all of a sudden, we get greater restriction. We are prisoners, but nobody can stop us from talking to each other. So we had a wonderful experience of having communication with people with whom we couldn't communicate for a very long time. He was full of laughter. He was a person who had a flair for music, and in prison he was a good company. He never allowed the prison community to be in any way spread with depression. He was a nice person to have in prison with you, because he was cheerful.
He was highly respected by the warders. And when there was a problem, it was him to talk to the warders.
To Luthuli. The tremendous respect shown to Luthuli by African and white Indian members of the security force was something which was an eye-opener to the rest of the accused there, that such a relationship existed.
I gave evidence for 1 week. It was really to outline what our aims were. We were not fighting against the government, we were just fighting for our rights in this land. And I didn't think we would be hanged for that. They made it so much in the press that the punishment for treason is death. And my wife was so scared that they were going to be killed. I said, oh, no, take it easy. They won't do it.
The leadership was debilitated long before the treason trial because there were all these banning orders. That started the process of weakening the Congress movement. And the treason trial, well, obviously it exacerbated that process. Because now, you see, they were put on the defensive, and they had to spend all their time getting funding. I would say that, if anything, what the trial did was to further develop the growing unity of the radical front. It also brought in the whites, who were equally charged with blacks. So it strengthened the anti-apartheid front. That's what it did.
I was discharged with 64 others after a year. But for others, the trial was to drag on for over 4 years. Meanwhile, just as the treason trial began, a boycott was organized in Alexandra Township against PATCO, who decided to increase bus fares. The people of Alexandra applied a total boycott, walking 20 miles and more to work each day. The bus boycott was a spontaneous movement of people already below the breadline. In fact, whites had a grandstand view of police viciousness on the route into Johannesburg, including intimidation of those whites who used their cars to help the boycotters. The fares were not increased and the boycott was called off. Also, in 1956, 20,000 women marched to the union buildings in Pretoria to protest the introduction of passes to women. "Straight on," they sang. "You have struck a rock." The government, as usual, buried its head in the sand. So the years of the trial saw Congress activities continue, while world awareness of our cause increased.
Discussing the reason for South Africa's withdrawal from UNO, Mr. Eric Lowe made a final protest against continued attempts to interfere in South Africa's domestic affairs.
And that in the circumstances attention may be diverted from the issue raised by my delegation in asking the Assembly to refrain from continuing to interfere in South Africa's domestic affairs.
The resistance was also facing some trouble. Congress favors unity of all resistors. The Africanists are for Africans only.
There was a time when the Africans, before they broke away, were very vociferous, attacking everybody. And it was clear that in the Transvaal, the members of the ANC had lost patience with them totally, and they wanted Chief to expel them. And Chief said, no. They are entitled to their point of view. Let them keep it up. If they get support, we're in good.
The attacks on Congress by the Africanists led to the calling of a Transvaal Provincial Congress in November 1958. I was chairman. Abuse was hurled freely, and I was called an agent of Moscow.
Now, we were now ANC delegation and examining the credentials, and the credentials of these were not accepted. Because they were not accepted, they wanted to cause trouble. So they were, in any event, looking for an excuse to find a way of taking away. But Luthuli was hostile. He regarded them as mischief maker.
His leadership was never questioned. Even the people in PAC were not so much opposed to Luthuli as they were opposed to people like Sisulu, people like Robert Gesha, I get to call. Mainly, their criticism was that they were Reds.
You know, once Moses Kotane came to meet him, you know Moses Kotane was a communist. So they had a meeting, and when he left, Luthuli tells me, he says, you know, Moses and I are colleagues in the struggle. Until freedom, we fight together. After freedom, we fight each other. Because he's a communist and I'm not one.
Luthuli had no difficulty with that at all. None whatsoever. As long as you didn't try and turn the ANC into a communist organization, that was a different thing.
Late in 1958, J.G. Strydom died and Hendrik French Verwoerd took his place.
Again, you've got to turn your mind back to the white politics of the day, when that was the beginning of the real tough Verwoerdian era was then about to dawn. Verwoerd was Minister of Native Affairs, appointed by Malone, and he had as his Secretary of Native Affairs a chap called Dr. Iselin. And the two were I would think, the architects of the entire apartheid system. They were a frightening combination, actually, because they had a total obsession with their belief that they could force separation on South Africa. Verwoerd carried it further, as we know, in later years when he evolved the separate development policy, which was, he claimed, to give apartheid a more positive content, but it was the ultimate partition of South Africa, and it was a massive piece of social engineering, which we are still suffering from today.
Soon after parliamentarians returned to Cape Town for the opening of the new session, the Prime Minister, Dr. H.F. Verwoerd, made an important announcement on policy.
I have just announced in Parliament details of the granting of self-government to the Transkei. The Transkei is the first Bantu homeland which has approached the government of the Republic to aid it by means of this great step on the road to independence.
He sketched rosy pictures in those days of having a white mother, South Africa, in the center, and these happy black satellite independent states around it, and all would be peaceful.
The Transkei will have a wholly black parliament and cabinet, since the white inhabitants of the Transkei will have no political rights there but in the Republic.
It has long been government policy to give the Bantu eventual self-government in their own homelands. With an area of 16,000 square miles, the Transkei is by far the biggest. Here live 17,000 whites, 14,000 coloreds, and 1.5 million Bantu belonging to...
It was a huge secede, government by stools, and never intended to be truly independent. Early in the year 1959, I was asked to address a predominantly Afrikaner group in Pretoria.
When I have just started in Afrikaans to welcome people, Luthuli was on the left-hand side, Mickey on my right-hand side, and I was 30 seconds in the welcome when Klaasen walked into the door and said, "Meneer die voorsitter, Mr. Chairman, on a point of order, they still people want to come in." The audience was silent. I knew it was happening, and because I'll come to Klaasen now, who I met before, and the people sided down the hall and in the back, and they were rough. People inside told me, diplomats, they thought it was security police, but I knew it was coming. And physically I'm not a hero, but strange how calm one can become.
So I thought, well, not in a white society, are you going to, black men are going to address white people. So I decided I'm going to break it up, there and then that night.
And as they were in, I said, all right, let us now proceed. He says no. He spoke obviously in Afrikaans. Mr. Chairman, in the name of the Afrikanerdom, we will not allow whites and Afrikaners to be addressed by a Kafir.
So I went over to Serfontein, the chairman, and I said to him, you hear that, against the meeting. So he said to me, get off here or something like that, while eating. Show down.
I remember I was knocked off the platform the first time, and I still see a young white thug. Luthuli had a presence of mind. He just went like this under the table. They kicked the table over, and I saw a young guy, very short, running, and then like a long jumper, jumping through the head, kicking Luthuli on the head.
And the milky team right under the table.
And the police wagon, they were taken away. I can't remember how it was, 10, 15, 20 people. And my wife and somebody else, they were bandaging Luthuli, and Luthuli was fine. Now, of course, it was a great moral victory. He made a passionate appeal to blacks, to whites, to work with blacks, and blacks didn't want to drive them in the sea. It was again Z.K. Matthews and others, and I felt like a pig when I handed to give Luthuli back to him, and now Luthuli's got a bandaged head or something and blood on his face. And I apologized, and he sort of laughed. He says, no, why are you worried? It's not your fault, and don't be upset, and this is normal. It's the growing pains of a nation.
That meeting was raided by some right-wingers, and they assaulted him. So the next day he sent me a telegram to inform his wife that he's recovered quite well after the mishap, and nothing to worry about.
On account of that trouble there, that he got the Nobel Prize.
He came to Cape Town at the invitation of the Black Sash in, I suppose it was about the late 50s. And it was a real tour de force because he had a series of house meetings in the southern suburbs of Cape Town, which were packed out, and Luthuli got a tremendous press in the Cape, and was a very, very popular figure.
The atmosphere was most exciting. If there wasn't room, people pushed up, they shoved up, and there were people in the aisles, there were people walking up and down, there were people running up and down upstairs, standing on seats up there, and Luthuli himself came. He was introduced by this person and that person, who all spoke very highly of him. And then he came. And really, it was the most wonderful, most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life, because he didn't just stand, but he stood up, and then he went up and he'd go down, and he was singing,
Mayibuye, Mayibuye, Africa.
We are not callous to fears that the white man may be swamped. But must he, because of those fears, be excused for refusing his fellow men rights?
At the end of the meeting, Libby, who was in her school uniform, had been listening at the back, standing at the back, and she was pushing forward, and I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm going to get his signature. So I said, oh, why? And she said, well, I haven't heard so much sense talked ever before, and I think this man must be going to be our Prime Minister one day.
He must have been down there, I suppose, only for about a week, but I mean, it was really a tremendous success. And it was shortly after that, when he returned to Groutville, that the banning order was slapped on him.
I was able to visit Johannesburg as planned before my ban took effect. Then it was back to Groutville to begin 5 years of banishment.
I was incensed about this, and I put a question on the audit paper in Parliament. Now, I was then a young backbencher in the United Party, and as you know, it was a very timid, effete party even in those days. And I asked a very simple question as to, of my namesake, I think it was Minister of Justice, C.R. Swart, Blackie Swart as he was known, simply as to why Luthuli had been banned. Would he give reasons? And the question was duly answered in the typical government way, but Swart said it was none of my business to ask these questions, and the government had good reason to ban him, and he was not prepared to give details. Anyway, at the end of that session, I then made up my mind it was time I met Albert Luthuli. And so, using a contact who was a bookkeeper in Stanger, E.V. Mohammed. And I was introduced to Albert Luthuli, who impressed me immensely by his stature, his manner. And I remember, and I think I record that there, that he shook hands with me and said, you know, this is the first time I've ever met my Member of Parliament. That was quite a nice little barb. And then he looked at me and he said, well, keep up the good work, but don't stick your neck out too far, with a twinkle in his eye. And I said, well, why do you say that? And he said, well, because I want you to know that I recognize that you're dealing with a very backward electorate, so go easily. It was not long after that we broke from the United Party and formed the Progressive Party. He applauded the formation of the Progressive Party, and he said, well, at least it's a sign that at last some people, white politicians, are coming to grips with the model issue, and he was interested in the sort of policies we were formulating. He was very critical of the whole implementation of course, as all black leaders have been throughout, of the pass laws and influx control, which they all would come to immediately and say this is the greatest single source of irritant amongst the black people, being challenged for their passes at every opportunity and being evicted from so-called white areas and that sort of thing. So, I mean, he foresaw, in that sense, he foresaw what happened at the time of Sharpeville. That, I mean, this was going to blow off the lid of the kettle. It was building up, and people were just sick of being pushed around like this.
We ask all men of goodwill to take action against apartheid, support economic sanctions, call for international isolation of South Africa. Don't buy South African products. Don't trade or invest in South Africa until an effective international quarantine of apartheid is established. We mean to use those non-violent weapons, even against such tyrants as the South African government. The pace quickens. In 1960, and despite a lack of preparation, Robert Sobukwe launches the PAC campaign against the pass laws, resulting on the 21st March in brutal police retaliation and 69 deaths at Sharpeville. I'm in Pretoria giving evidence at the treason trial, from where I call for a national day of mourning on 28th March. On 27th March, I burn my reference book.
He burnt his pass in a basin in my bedroom. I was not present. My brother John was present, and a Pretoria News photographer must have been present, because the following day in the Pretoria News there appeared a photograph of him and the basin and the smoke rising. And when I got back that evening, there was the basin with the ashes in it, and I emptied the ashes out and said, I still have the ashes to this day. And the security police, of course, arrived with this photograph, and they started to search the house. They wanted to find the basin. And my brother's youngest child was a baby at that stage. She was still in nappies, and so my brother's wife, Meg, quickly filled the basin with a lot of filthy nappies in the bathroom. And she let the filthier parts of the nappies overlap over the edge of the basin so that it wouldn't be recognized, and of course they never discovered the basin. But it must have been, of course, after Sharpeville that I acted for some time, some days or weeks, I can't remember how long, as his chauffeur. And I drove the chief around to various townships where he presided over pass burning ceremonies. But then he and my brother, as I say, were arrested in the middle of the night. They were carted off to jail. My mother rushed down the garden path with the chief's slippers, shouting, "Chief, Chief, you mustn't forget to wear your slippers or you'll catch a chill." Security police were somewhat astounded by this gentle old lady and her concern for Chief Luthuli.
I'm fined £100 for burning my pass. This is paid for by the Defence and Aid Fund. Oliver Tambo, ANC Vice President, is sent out of the country by Congress to act as a roving ambassador. On April 8th, the government finally burns Congress, declaring it unlawful and proclaims a nationwide state of emergency. Arrests continue until 20,000 South Africans of all colors are in detention. Meanwhile, the treason trial continues. One high point comes on 29th March 1961, when Mrs. Justice Rumpf asked the remaining treason trialists to stand, and after a trial which has lasted over 4 years states, "You are found not guilty and discharged." The crowd outside jubilantly danced and sang, "Nkosi sikelele iAfrika."
After his release from detention, Albert Luthuli returned to Groutville, confined there by successive banning orders for the remaining 7 years of his life. In March 1961, the magnetic forcefulness of Nelson Mandela brought him to the forefront of resistance politics when he was elected leader of the National Action Council.
Now, they had banned the African National Congress, the Communist Party, and the Pan-Africanist Congress. They have tightened the screws of repression, and the brutality of the police and the army was beyond words. And we had to decide what to do. That situation demanded that either we capitulate or we stand up and fight back. And the only way of fighting back was the formation of Umkhonto weSizwe. And of course, the chief, as a man who believed in non-violence, argued in the meeting of the National Executive against this decision. But he was a highly disciplined man, and the majority was in favor of taking this decision, and he accepted the decision of the majority. We then called a meeting of all the congresses, and the meeting started about 8 o'clock in the evening until 8 o'clock the following morning. And the chief also put forward his argument. But in the course of that argument, he made a remarkable statement. He said, "No, look, I'm not a pacifist. Anybody who thinks I'm a pacifist, let him try and go and take my chickens. He will see what type of man I am. I am putting forward the view that we should still stick to non-violence, because in my view, the conditions still permit the employment of this method of struggle. But we were able to reach a compromise. The ANC itself is not going to embark on violence, because we were an organization that was formed on the principle of non-violent, disciplined, and peaceful action. But we understand that the time you have convinced us that the conditions in the country demand that we should start resort to violence. So we are giving you permission
to go and start this organization and link up with other organizations which are now operating underground, but don't involve the ANC.
Specifically, when we went on the question of formation of MK, we were instructed that we must ensure that no lives were involved.
But under those conditions, it was not possible all the time to go and report the decision to the chief. But we were in constant contact with him.
On Dingaan's Day, 16th December 1961, the first explosions reverberated through South Africa. 6 days previously, Albert Luthuli had received the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'll say it brought a lot of excitement to the family. You know, recognition at international level for a black man in the country in those days was quite unheard of.
To me, the significance of the Nobel Peace Prize was it was recognition of the entire world that in South Africa we had reached a position with racism which had to be opposed by the world jointly, as had been done with what Hitler had done in Germany.
My husband and I were friends of Evie Mohammed, and Evie was a wonderful person. He was a bookkeeper in Stanger. There was this wonderful friendship between Evie and Chief, and this wonderful warmth of welcome that between friends. When Chief got the Nobel Prize, Evie was absolutely thrilled, and he just abandoned his own business. He turned his office in town, in Stanger, into an office for Chief. And he, at his own expense, took all the overseas correspondence, telephone calls, interviews with people from all over the world who were wanting to get in touch with Chief.
So Grafton became a place of pilgrims. People went from all over the world, went there.
On the day of his departure, of their departure, because his wife went with him, they came into town and there was a special banquet for them, wonderful send-off. Then at the airport there was a big crowd of African women, I suppose you'd call it toy-toying around the aeroplane, around the aerodrome, and I thought this was wonderful and I joined in too.
Moved to a hotel, and that's where some work started for him. He was interviewed almost by everybody.
But I took the award as an endorsement of our own struggle in South Africa and the manner in which we have tried to carry out that struggle under very difficult circumstances in our country. And the award is a great encouragement to all of us. For I must say, I regarded the award as not just to Albert Luthuli, but to South Africa, particularly to the struggling people of South Africa.
Whatever may be the future of our freedom efforts, our cause is the cause of the liberation of people who are denied freedom. Only on this basis can the peace of Africa and the world be firmly founded. Our cause is the cause of equality between nations and peoples. Only thus can the brotherhood of men be firmly established. It is encouraging and elating to remind you that despite her humiliation and torment at the hands of white rule, the spirit of Africa in the quest for freedom has been generally for peaceful means to the utmost. In bringing my address to a close, let me invite Africa to cast her eyes beyond the past and to some extent the present, with their woes and tribulations, trials and failures, and some success, and see herself as an emerging continent bursting to freedom through the shell of centuries of serfdom. This is Africa's age, the dawn of her fulfillment. Yes, the moment when she must grapple with destiny to reach summits of sublimity, saying, ours was a fight for noble values and worthy ends, and not for lands and enslavement of men.
Nkosi sikelele Afrika malo phakamiso dumo lwayo yizwa imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela Nkosi sikelele Afrika.
You know, of course, the special branch in the police would say to me, huh? Peace Prize. We know what's happening.
The movement bought the farm with the Peace Prize money. The farm was wood arable land. But for the movement, the interest was hosting and helping to establish people who escaped South Africa so that they can find root outside of South Africa.
Back home, the struggle was moving inevitably towards a climax. Albert Luthuli's autobiography, Let My People Go, was published and immediately banned in South Africa. Then, early in 1962, Nelson Mandela secretly toured the African continent and visited London. Important objectives were to set up a guerrilla movement in exile and to intensify the international campaign now gathering momentum against apartheid. Shortly after his return to South Africa, Mandela was captured in Natal after a meeting with Chief Luthuli in Stanger. He was not to see freedom again for 27 years.
The organization was illegal. Many of its leaders were paralyzed, were confined to specific areas. The chief himself was confined to Groundville.
My father suffered terrific isolation. He was a man of the people. He liked crowds. You know, he liked to interact with people, and people liked him. They liked to come and talk to him and get advice and talk to him. He had this infectious, big laugh. When he laughed and rocked, the place. So that kind of isolation and being cut off from the people was very, very painful indeed. We could see it, we could see that he was, he was suffering. But that's one thing, the surveillance. The feeling that the special branch is there somewhere, and the feeling that even your neighbors now, some of them are keeping perhaps an eye. These things are very, very unpleasant indeed, very unpleasant.
1963 saw the introduction of vicious new security legislation by Minister of Justice B.J. Vorster, who was later to succeed Verwoerd and perpetuate his policies.
I believe in the policy of separate development, not only as a philosophy,
but also as the only practical solution in the interests of everyone to eliminate friction and to do justice to every population group as well as every member thereof.
Torture and deaths in detention became the norm.
There was torture, and once they used torture, they got all the information that they wanted. And then there were the charges, and this way they broke the whole thing.
Then, on 11th July, came the blow which crushed internal resistance on any scale for over a decade. The leadership of Umkhonto weSizwe was arrested at Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia, Johannesburg. The Rivonia trialists were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment on Robben Island. After the verdict, a statement from Chief Luthuli was read at the Security Council of the United Nations, urging sanctions on South Africa.
Sentences of life imprisonment have been pronounced to the Rivonia trialists. They used every acceptable non-violent method, but finally all avenues of resistance were closed. In the face of uncompromising white refusal to abandon apartheid, no one can blame just men for seeking justice by violent methods. These men represent the highest in morality and ethics. When they are locked away, justice and reason will have departed from South Africa.
Well, we appreciate what Great Britain is doing, but quite frankly, it's not enough. Great Britain is one of the big nations of the world, so is America and other nations, and it is these big nations that must do big things. And I think, as I said somewhere else, there must be just be big nations, but must also be big at heart. And bigness at heart means that you must defend the underdog. Go to all limits to defend the underdog. And I don't think that they have.
You must understand the difficulties at the time. Luthuli was trying to keep the ANC going. The government was determined to smash the ANC. Luthuli, it wasn't normal times. Remember, from the time of 1963, it was not normal time.
Well, whatever was happening strictly underground. And even for that matter, I wouldn't ask questions either. Because we knew that, look, if anyone of us got arrested, it is very difficult not to speak there, after what they do to you when you're detained. So the less we knew, the better it was.
By 1965, South Africa displayed a stable, prosperous surface. But unreported in white South Africa, the ANC in exile was building for the future. For another decade, white complacency was not to be seriously disturbed. Banished, banned and silenced, Albert Luthuli never gave up the struggle. His last years were of necessity spent quietly in Groutful, supervising his shop in Canefield. The route he traversed every day to his fields followed the railway line and crossed the bridge over the Mvoti River.
And we did have, in fact, a memorial service in prison. And I remember that I actually wept. Couldn't control myself that day.
Everybody had doubts. It seemed a very strange thing that anybody as intelligent as Albert Luthuli could get into a position where he was knocked down by a train. I wouldn't like to say any more. I've never heard or seen anything to suggest that it wasn't an accident.
The task is not finished. Somewhere ahead there beckons a civilization, a culture which will take its place in the parade of God's history. It will not necessarily be all black, but it will be African. The struggle will go on. God give me strength and courage enough. I shall die, if need be, for this cause. Mayibuye, Africa. Come, Africa, come.
He was a man, therefore was regarded not just as a leader of the ANC, but as a leader of the country as a whole.
I've never met anybody as great a leader. No. I think he's feeling that all he did and all his suffering was worthwhile.
Nkosi sikelele Afrika malo phakamiso dumolayo yizwa imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela Nkosi siyosili Afrika malo phakamiso dumolayo yizwa imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela woza moya woza moya woza moya